in Palestine, when settler colonialism was raised, and there was a demand that actually this new condemnation, very welcome condemnation of colonialism as both an act that violates international law and therefore anti-colonialist struggle is, including an armed struggle, is a legitimate way of defending yourself when, including, by the way, Palestinians, were interested in saying, let's also talk about settler colonial states, such as Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand. Remember, this is 1960. Algeria is still under French settler colonial rule, and Palestine and South Africa. It was Canada, the United States, Australia, and Israel who made sure that settler colonialism would not be included in the categorization of political outfits or structure that A, are illegal under international law, and B, could be resisted legally and legitimately. In fact, they made a very special reference to colonies that are not geographically separated from the mother country, and thus Indian settlers that come and colonize Kashmir, Jewish settlers that come and colonize Palestine are not included in this category, and this has not as yet been challenged. The reason was not just racist and pro-Zionist, if you want, or pro-Israeli or pro-Indian. The reason was that the international law could only deal, in the eyes of its authors and its keepers and its gatekeepers, could only be maintained through a set of ideas of, or could only be maintained around the idea of sovereignty, of sovereignty. Only existing, actually, if you look at it, only existing sovereign states have the right to defend themselves. Only existing sovereign states are have a kind of a sacred status within the discussion of both international law and the armed struggle against it. It goes back to the Peace of Westphalia. I don't have time to go to it in 1648, but this is the kind of discourse and thinking behind international law, which, and I agree with Ramzi that public opinion was definitely reading it the way he did, but I'm afraid people who are experts on international law and are trained in American universities or British universities would find it difficult under the premises of the existing system of international law to find the right of self-defense to an outfit which is not a sovereign state. This is the main Israeli trick, that as long as there is no Palestinian state, it cannot play in the same field as Israel can because of that. So what is the solution in a way? What is the way forward in order to, not in order to legitimize Palestinian self-defense? It's legitimate. There's no doubt about it. And the same is true about Kashmir. You know, in Arabic, rightly so, the Palestinians in Arabic make a distinction between international law, al-Qanun al-Dawli, and the international legitimacy, al-Shar'iyya al-Duwaliyya. If you would look at every Palestinian document since 1948, in fact, since 1917 until today, you will see that Palestinians anchor their demands and their right of self-defense, not just in the legal international law, al-Qanun al-Dawli, but mainly in the international legitimacy, al-Shar'iyya al-Duwaliyya, which does not really exist as a set of institutions or documents, but is the world consciousness. It's the moral right that civil societies are very quick to recognize and governments don't want to recognize. So the way forward in many ways, is to look at the way that indigenous people now around the world, Native Americans in the United States, the First Nations in Canada, activists on behalf of Aboriginals in Australia and Maoris in New Zealand, and other groups which are not defined as national movements or states. Uh, 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 the Black Lives Matters in America, the Palestinians in Israel as a kind of a subcategories within the Palestinian national movement. This discourse is now making its appearance, and it will revolutionize if it succeeds the whole nation, the whole notion of international law, and by inference also the right of self-defense. It is not just the game of existing sovereign states. It's the game of people who are oppressed, and particularly inside settler colonial setups. And the settler colonial setup, by which people colonize someone else's homeland in a project of displacement and replacement, these two, this kind of concept has been implemented by force in Palestine since 1882 and also in Kashmir. And it was motivated exactly by this idea of getting rid of the indigenous people, either by genocide or by ethnic cleansing or by other means. And hence, the very act of settler colonialism, the first act of settler colonialism, is something that the indigenous native people had the right to defend themselves from. And therefore, it's a very old, it's a very sacred and veteran right of self-defense that goes back to the very first encounter between the settlers and the native people, the indigenous people. The only thing I'm warning here is that this very act of aggression that continues to this very day in the case of both Kashmir and Palestine is not recognized in the international law as an act of aggression. We have to understand it. It is recognized by us, by the civil societies, by the solidarity movements, and so on. But the international legal system on its institution, by its own charters and laws, does not recognize it. But there is pressure from below, and that's why I'm optimistic, and with this I would end. There's pressure from below by the civil society in the former colonialist empires to change the whole discourse, and therefore it will impact hopefully also the way that the institutions are being established, the way it is the charters would be written and authored, and therefore it cannot be just a Kashmiri and a Palestinian struggle. It has to be an international struggle. And I can give you the first indication that something fundamental is going to change if, for instance, the situation of the African Americans and the situation of the First Nations, for instance, in Canada, where just recently a mass grave of children was discovered from the 1950s, if these issues would also be part of the discourse of international law, of a crime against people who have the right to defend themselves, if this would be the language that we will hear from above, not just from below, we will know that we are in the middle of a very important revolution in the way we understand international morality, the right of people to defend themselves, and the meaning of decolonization in the 21st century, which can only be the dismantling of the settler colonial institution, occupation, and ethnic cleansing, both in Kashmir and in Palestine. Thank you.